Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Craig.
And I'm Todd.
And today, well, actually, lately, Todd has been very generous in letting me select the movies that we talk about. And I'm afraid that eventually he's going to start to regret that decision.
Are you talking about today's movie by chance?
All right, so today's movie is from 1987. It is Dolls, directed by Stuart Gordon. It's a Charles Band production. It was written by Ed Naha. And I picked this movie mostly because I found it on Amazon Prime, and I remembered really liking this movie as a kid. This is one of the movies that I remember distinctly from the video store because the box art was very simple but very cool. It was just this doll holding its own eyeballs. Mm-hmm. And, just the very simple title, Dolls. And for whatever reason, that was very appealing to me as a kid. I found it spooky and interesting. And I remember making my dad rent this for me multiple times, and I remembered really enjoying it. So I was really looking forward to going back and watching it. Plus, it's only an hour and 17 minutes long, which is also a bonus.
We like short movies.
It's true. And so I was stoked to sit down and watch it again, and frankly, I don't know if I want to say I was disappointed, because still the things that I think that I liked about it as a kid are still there. It has an interesting charm, and it is one of those movies that I feel like, I don't know if it was intentionally geared towards kids. In fact, I don't think that it was, but there's something about it that I think is appealing to kids because, I don't know, it doesn't really, it kind of comes from the perspective of the child actress who plays the lead role, but there's also some good practical effects and gore effects, and those things I still appreciate. Beyond that, is it the greatest movie? No, probably not. Do you have any history with this movie at all? Had you seen it before?
Well, a lot like you, Craig, I remember seeing the box art, the doll with his eyes pulled out and a little bit of a skull face underneath there. But no, I never rented this before. I wouldn't have even imagined that it is what I would almost consider a kid's horror movie.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at who made it. You've got Stuart Gordon here, who's the Reanimator guy.
Yep. Charles
Band, who did the Puppet Master and all that stuff. Although those movies aren't terribly brutal or anything like that. Mm. It was actually in the course of investigating this movie, after I watched it, that I realized that crew of people, Ed Naha, Stuart Gordon, and Brian Usna, all three were responsible for writing Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Oh, that's right. You've told me that before. That's funny.
Yeah. So I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised that they can kind of, that they're flexible people. But yeah, coming from Stuart Gordon and remembering what a kind of crazy movie Reanimator was, and definitely a little bit more in the schlocky horror fare, I was surprised to see that this was almost a kid's movie. And you're right, it comes from that kid's perspective, and that's what's so charming about it. But it's definitely not a perfect film.
No, it's not, but I feel like it had a lot of potential.
It did. It's like it fell flat. It just fell a little short of that potential, right?
Yeah, this strikes me as something that is ripe for a remake. Like, I feel like they could do a lot more with it given the opportunity. It's interesting. I don't remember exactly how it came about, but I believe it was the producer, or one of the producers, who came across this concept art. I don't know if they commissioned it or if they just found it somewhere, but they had, to begin with, that box cover concept art of the doll holding its own eyeballs, and they wanted to just go from there. And they had this idea of, a movie about a killer doll, and the producer just said, you know what, they gave the writer, Ed Naha, they said, you've got complete freedom, but we want it to be about a killer doll, and you've got to incorporate this box art somehow into the movie. and this is where it went. And it's very much akin to Puppet Master. I mean,
it is.
You could almost, if they had chosen to call this Puppet Master 5 or whatever it would have been at the time, that would have been appropriate, and they could have easily, used some of their classic Puppet Master dolls in place of some of these more generic dolls, and it would have felt very much like a Puppet Master movie. Because it is. I mean, that's what you've got. You've got a bunch of killer dolls basically running around and causing havoc. But it's got this cute little setup.
Yeah.
We start out with this family on the road, and the dad is David, played by Ian Patrick Williams. The stepmother, she's not the child's mother, which they make great pains of making very clear, Rosemary, and she's played by Carolyn Purdy Gordon, who is the director's wife and who apparently starred in several of his movies. And then the little girl named Judy, played by Carrie Lorraine. And they are out on vacation, apparently, somewhere in Europe, because they drive on the other side of the car.
Yeah.
And they end up getting stuck in this big thunderstorm, and they have to, as often happens in these types of movies, they have to find somewhere to get out of the storm, and of course, they find this big creepy mansion.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find interesting about the movie now, and I don't remember noticing it so much as when I was a kid, and maybe it's because when I was a kid, you're less observant of over-the-top sorts of things, but one of the things that just struck me from the beginning is that these parents are just awful.
Yeah.
They're just horrible, awful people who are just terrible and mean to this poor little girl. And she's so sweet. Like, she's this sweet, cute little thing. And they are just nasty. Like, when the car breaks down, the dad has to get out and push. And, of course, the mom is just over the top awful. Like, she's this rich bitch, for lack of a better word, and it's obvious that they don't want this little girl with them, and like they don't even try to hide that fact from the kid.
They're saying it in front of her. They're saying his stuff to her.
Yeah.
I could use a little help out here, dearest.
Unless you plan on levitating this thing, I think it's here to stay.
Oh, damn. I'm gonna kill that kid.
Stand in line.
Yeah, you expect the sort of evil stepmother trope. You don't expect the jerk-ass dad who also doesn't want her around.
Right, and especially, they do a good job of making Rosemary, she looks like an evil stepmother. She's all glammed out in her, like, turban and too much makeup and her fur coat. But the dad looks like a nice dad from a movie, but he's not. He's horrible, too.
Why does he even have custody? What's the deal there?
Exactly. Apparently, the Judy's mom lives in Boston or something, and Judy spends the summers with her with her dad. And at some point in the movie, the dad's like, "I know you don't like spending the summer with me. Guess what? I don't really like it either." It's terrible.
And it's also terrible, like, what you're saying is so true when you're quoting these lines. So much of this movie, part of what's really flawed about it is the writing is like that, right?
Yeah.
The writing just spells out everything for us as if we can't figure it out for ourselves. At some point, the characters are going to say something and point things out to the audience time and time again.
Well, and I've seen it online described. I was reading about like the critical reception of it, and it got really mixed critical reviews at the time. Some critics liked it, some didn't. One of them called it a modern day fairy tale, and I don't remember where it went at, but I get that. It is kind of like a modern day fairy tale in that the characters are very one note and over the top, and the writing really is not that good, I guess, unless you're a kid and you don't really question motivation. Like, for example, when they are making their way in the rain to this old spooky mansion. Judy's just walking along behind them, and for no reason, the stepmom turns around and grabs her teddy bear out of her arms, and Judy's like, "That's Teddy, he's my best friend, we go everywhere together." And she's like, "Well, not today," and she just throws it in the woods, like, for no reason. Like,
Yeah.
that was so mean.
She makes some flippant comment like, we'll move a lot faster without this guy or whatever. But like, no, she's just holding him in his arms and in her arms, and she's walking along just fine behind you. But it's pretty bad. And also, it's really not raining, even though it's supposed to be raining.
Right.
When they're inside the car, it's raining on the window. As soon as they step outside the car, it's not raining. When they're walking down the street, it's not raining. Although they talk about how it's raining and they're getting wet.
The good thing about, I mean, it's a setup because, you know, she throws this teddy bear out into the woods, and then Judy, who apparently is known for having a vivid imagination, plays out this whole fantasy in her mind where the teddy bear grows to like beyond life size. And
It's so wonderful.
yeah, it's really good. And like it comes out of the woods looking like a teddy bear, but then like it busts out of its teddy bear seams to reveal this terrifying, not realistic looking, but like this monstrous bear that then gruesomely like dismembers and eats the parents.
and then turns towards her and like shrugs his shoulders like,
Yeah, because she says, "Teddy, no," and it turns around like, "Oops, sorry."
I love that bit. Actually, I thought that as clunky as that was setting that up, I thought it really set a tone, or at least it was trying to set a tone for what, you know, the movie is going to be like. That it's going to be a bit of a comedy, and it's also going to be a little kiddish. Right? Again, points out that, like you said, this is going to be from the perspective of the girl and has to do a lot with her imagination. So, you know, I don't know. Once we hear later on when they keep talking about her imagination in such a nasty way.
Look, I know you don't enjoy spending your summers with me. I don't like it either. But I'm sick of you lying all the time, okay? I don't want to hear it anymore. No more fairies, elves, princesses, ghosts, goblins, talking trees. I'm sick of it all, okay? I don't want to hear any more stories for the rest of the summer. Now get out of here. Go to bed.
But
Out!
Daddy!
Better do what he says, short stuff. He may not be able to give you a swat, but I can.
And that in and of itself is just awful. Like, stop having an imagination, kid.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Like, it's a kid. Leave her alone. But the other thing that I like about that scene is that it evidences the fact that there are some really cool practical effects going on in this movie.
Yes.
And when there is violence and gore and bloodshed, it looks good. Like, the scene in which it occurs may be ridiculous, but the effects themselves actually look quite good, and I was impressed with that.
It is, and this is, I think, something we said about Puppet Master 2, right? About how, as ridiculous as it gets at times, that we thought that it did a pretty good job of making these puppets look real.
Yeah.
And giving them personality. That's surprising, honestly, because how much, even like Barbarella, have you ever seen Barbarella?
No.
Those little dolls in that movie that I think it actually shot around the same time this did. Even they don't look as realistic as these dolls do when they're moving around and doing stuff. It's really quite cool.
I haven't seen it, but I did read that they were inspired by that movie for the look of these dolls in this movie.
Did you really? Are you kidding me?
No, I read that.
Well, there must be some like subconscious connection because at least one of those dolls looked exactly like the little dolls that come after Jane Fonda and Barbarella in one of the scenes, and it was just sprung to my head. So it's interesting to hear. No, I guess that's why.
There you go.
My other favorite part of this movie is now, so they come to this house and they go in, they knock on the door and nobody answers. And so they sneak inside into the basement, again, to get out of the rain that's not there.
Right.
And it's funny because as they go inside, suddenly the rain comes down again on this girl. And as they come inside and pull her into it, suddenly everybody's dry again. Even though Mom is complaining about how the rain ruined her fur coat, which looks completely dry. There's like so much of this going on in the movie too that's a little distracting, but again, like you said, as a kid you probably overlook this sort of thing.
Yeah.
They come in and the little girl sees a little something out of the corner of her eye, and we do too, but we don't get a quick enough we don't get a long enough look at it. It just looks like maybe little yellow glowing eyes or something in the corner.
Yeah.
And this is another neat thing about this movie is this build that it gives. Whereas as we go into this house and as we're going through this house, throughout the house, you just see little movements. You see dolls. You see them. Sometimes they're there. Sometimes they seem to disappear. Sometimes they seem to be looking in one direction in one frame, and then another direction when the shot comes back to it. And it's so subtle in many cases, and so quick that it's really creepy.
It is creepy.
It's done really well, I think.
And it's subtle to the extent that, like, it's just little things that happen, but they also make no mystery of the fact that these dolls move, and are animated. Like, you see it from the very beginning. It's not. You're not asking, right? You're not asking yourself, "Oh, are they really?" No, they are.
It's like a close up of a face. It looks left and right.
Right.
Something like that.
And like the doll's eyes will be a little bit bloodshot. They look pretty cool.
But I love this setting. This house looks fantastic.
It does.
This is such a great haunted house. It's kind of like a haunted house movie. It's like a classic haunted house movie. The way the set is decorated, the layout of the house, and the sweet older couple who live there, who have just enough of a sinister edge.
Just enough. Yeah, not much, just enough.
No, it's like they seem okay. Like at first you think, oh man, these guys stepped into the lion's den. But then as the scenes go on and we get to know more about this couple, and their names are Gabriel and Hillary, and they're older, and they're both recognizable actors. An actress in this movie. Actually, Hillary, you might have recognized from Don't Look Now.
Oh, no, I didn't recognize her. That's funny.
She's the blind woman.
No, I didn't notice that. And I didn't know if they were recognizable or if they were just...
So archetype.
Right, exactly. But in a good way. Like this old British couple, and he's tall and distinguished and handsome, and she's a little bit more diminutive, but they're both gray-haired, and they just seem like this sweet couple, and they like, it's almost ridiculous how inviting they are. Like, yes, they greet them in the basement with the shotgun because these people broke into their house, but as soon as they see that they have a little girl with them, then they're very welcoming and inviting and say, you can stay here, that's fine. Eventually, some other people show up. This guy, this bigger guy, Ralph. And when I say bigger, I don't mean like, morbidly obese, and I also don't mean like, professional wrestler. Just, this kind of portly, nice-looking guy. He shows up, and he has picked up these two hitchhikers who we actually saw on the street when the other people were driving along, who are dressed in their best Madonna drag. Like, one of them is dressed specifically like Madonna, and the other one is very much inspired and actually wears the boy toy belt that Madonna wore in the 80s. And they're funny.
And they have the heaviest Cockney accents they could possibly muster.
Absolutely. And I didn't recognize either of them, but one of them, Isabel, was the girl, the hot girl from the Aha Take On Me video, which is...
really?
Yeah, which is one of the greatest music videos of all time.
And one of the best songs of all time, too.
Yeah, it's really good. But, they're totally playing to type.
Punk 80s hooligans. Yeah.
Right. Bunty Bailey was her name. That's a great name.
Is that a given name?
I don't know. But so all these people show up, and it turns out that Gabriel is a toy maker, and he has this little monologue where he explains that kids today aren't interested in the kinds of toys he makes anymore, the kinds of toys that are made with love and care and that are, one of a kind. And, of course, Judy's like, I do.
One thing I've noticed about you, you don't have a doll. That doesn't seem natural to me. A little girl without a doll is somehow incomplete.
I had Teddy when I left the car,
But the clumsy little deer dropped him in the forest.
I dropped it in the forest.
That's a shame. I can't replace Teddy, but I can make sure you have some company whilst you're here.
So Gabriel gives her this doll, which is a punch. He calls it Mr. Punch. It's a punch doll. And of course, it's a play on Punch and Judy, which I don't really know the history of this. Do you? The name is familiar to me, and I recognize the look of the doll with the hooked nose, and he's like a jester. But Punch and Judy, was that like an old TV show from like the 50s?
Oh, Punch and Judy goes back even further than that. I think it's goes back to medieval times. I mean, this was a classic two-character and historically puppets, like a puppet theater kind of thing. Well, it's one of those things, one of those British things, like pantomime and whatnot,
Gotcha.
where, you just had this Punch doll and this Judy doll, and they would argue and fight with each other, and Punch actually would hit Judy with like a bat or a club or something like that.
Oh, now that you say that, I can see it in my mind, so I know that I've seen it. Or some iteration of it.
And it looks just like this doll. Yeah, the classic Punch look is this doll here. So yeah, that was cute. I thought it was hilarious when they're at the table and they're discussing stuff, and I don't know what work one guy does, and then Rosemary asks, "What kind of work is that? Witchcraft?" You remember that?
Yeah.
And they both look at each other. And then, ha, 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 and these two forced laughs like, oh, my gosh.
Oh, you figured us out. Yeah, it was funny. Like, they blow it off. And so all these people are together in this spooky old mansion, and Gabriel takes them all around and gives them their own rooms, and the wicked parents are pleased that they're going to have their own room, and Judy's going to have a different room. Mm-hmm. Judy and Ralph are the last ones to be escorted to their rooms, and before they even get there, Gabriel shows them like his workshop, I think. Ralph is enamored immediately. Like you see,
Ralph is a little too overly excited about dolls, I'm afraid.
He is, but it's cute, and it's funny.
Cute.
It's funny because it's like he knows that he shouldn't be so excited about it, but he is. And Gabriel picks up on that immediately, and he's like, "Oh, you like dolls too?" And he's like, "Oh, well, yeah, I did when I was a kid." And he has a whole story that I feel like, this had to be one of the bases of the plot.
My father taught me everything I know.
That's funny. I was just thinking about my dad. He used to tell us stories about how toys woke up after we were asleep, and they'd start to wander all over the house. So I stayed up night after night to see if I can catch my toys playing on their own. Never made it, but I figured, well, if they're having such a good time with or without me, they might as well eat. So I started leaving cookies for them under my bed.
And what happened?
I raised several healthy families of ants.
And as it turns out, if I remember correctly, he lost his parents when he was very young. And so he's kind of held on to some of these childhood things. And in fact, he does, kind of have an affection for toys and dolls and stuff, which ultimately ends up being significant to the plot. It's silly and it's over the top, and the actor who plays him, Stephen Lee, plays it over the top.
Yeah.
But it's cute. Like, he feels like a big kid, and he feels like a suitable companion for Judy, and they do. They come together. They bond. When Judy starts seeing things and hearing things in the house, she goes to her parents, but her parents don't believe her at all. And so she goes to Ralph eventually and is like, "Do you believe kids when they tell you stuff?" And he's like, "Yeah, I guess." And she tells him the stuff that's going on. And even though he's skeptical, he doesn't just brush her off like her parents do. And it's nice. They have a cute little relationship.
And this is again, I believe we talked about this in another movie too. Oh, it must have been Invaders from Mars, right? Where that's like every kid's kind of fear and also fantasy is that adults will believe me, right?
Right.
And this movie plays on that as well. Ralph is the kid at heart. He's the only adult who's going to believe the kid. And even though he is over the top with it, he's got kind of an aw shucks way of going about it all. He has this like naivete and innocence that's, really unbelievable, but it's also really cute. And it's fun to see in this movie. And at least you kind of know where everybody's going to stand. Like, there's no question Ralph is going to live through this,
Right.
And also, I feel like that early scene when they have that discussion about the dolls, not only does it set up that really important plot point and, again, hit you on the head with this whole, oh, yeah, dolls come to life, as if we haven't seen enough dolls coming to life just before this. It also really, I think, kind of establishes that if you are cool with the old people, you're going to be fine.
Right.
That these old people are not... it's not like you stumbled into Dracula's den and they're out to get you. They are kindly old witches or whatever, doll maker witches.
Out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but they're nice and friendly as long as you're also nice and friendly.
And that's how it turns out. I mean, it's really a test, really.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a good, decent person, you're going to be okay. And if you're an asshole, then you're going to get what's coming to you.
And our first asshole is the one woman dressed like Madonna.
Right.
What was her name? Was she
Isabel?
She was Isabel.
Did you hear what she said?
Yeah, we can play the radio for a while.
Oh, about the antiquities.
Well, what about them?
Well, this place is loaded with them. I bet they have old jewellery and stuff stashed somewhere. We could swipe it tonight. Leave in the morning and those two would notice it for days. Or maybe even years.
No, they call the police.
You see any phones around? Look, we could make a fortune here. A lot more than we could nick in old Ralphie boy's wallet.
And so she goes out because she's less afraid of wandering out in the dark by herself. And I think she's even holding like a lighter or a candelabra or something. That's the other cute thing about this movie. It's like nobody has a flashlight.
No. And there's electricity in the house, and yet they will still walk around with these great candelabras. But that's fun. I mean, it's great
okay.
Haunted house feel.
Again, it gives it that good feel, right? It's like House on Haunted Hill. It's like the same kind of deal. So she's wandering around this house. And again, this house is awesome. And it is so classic haunted house. And it's filled with antiques. This movie doesn't look cheap at all in this way. Anyway, she wanders around. And sure enough, as she's rifling through the drawers and things, we see dolls looking at her, turning towards her. Again, there are dolls stuffed in every nook and cranny of this house, including on top of a mantle. Of a room that she's in, of a fireplace of a room that she's in, and she turns and she opens a music box and she walks away and the music box, opens back up again, and then this is kind of all this back and forth until the dolls finally jump on her. She's on the floor and something is dragging her across the floor and then grabs her arms and pulls her arms out and slides her towards the wall and just basically hits her head into the wall several times and then slides it out into the hallway, where Judy sees it because she's up getting a drink of water. And that horrifies her as this Madonna girl looks up at her with this bloodied, bruised face, reaches up in that classic help me pose, and gets sucked around the corner. Again, by these unseen dolls.
Yeah, I thought that scene was good too, and it was effectively brutal. She gets her face smashed up against the baseboard and stuff, and I thought that it was especially brutal because Judy witnesses the aftermath, and it is pretty gross, and like for a kid to see that kind of stuff is a little unsettling.
Yeah.
But I wanted to go back to what you were saying about the house because it is so cool. And they built all of that. Like, apparently they built this 2-story structure in a soundstage. And it was, really just like the interior of a house with hallways and rooms that they could enter and exit out of. And all around it, there was no exterior. It was just the interior on the soundstage. But you're right. It looks great. I mean, it's so convincing as this old spooky house. And they do it up so well. And one of the other things that I liked about it is that the dolls and the toys are so omnipresent. Like, they're everywhere. And there are tons of them. Everywhere you look, there are these dolls. And they're these old-fashioned, like, porcelain-faced dolls, most of them. And from afar, they look very normal. But whenever they do close-ups on them, they're obviously, effects created dolls with movable eyes, and even their faces have some mobility, and they're super spooky. This was made in the 80s, and it was made primarily with practical effects, and there are some times, I noticed at least once, when you can see the strings manipulating them.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't care. I don't know. I just thought it was fun. And that's the thing. It's not a great movie. It's really not. There's a lot of criticism that you could hurl at it. But there's also some really cool stuff going on. And I don't know. For that alone, I at least appreciate it. It's kind of cool on that level.
You do hate to knock this movie too much because it does have a lot of heart.
Yeah.
And it's effectively made. Not effectively made. It's well made. So much of it is well made. The cinematography is fantastic. Again, some of these actors, mostly the old people, are really quite good. Nobody else is. The girl's not very good. I was just thinking, Ralph reminds me a little bit of like a younger Sean Astin. He was giving me a little bit of that Sean Astin vibe.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit.
Like
it's funny you said that, and then my mind immediately went to Sean Penn, and I'm thinking maybe a little bit more Chris Penn.
No, like Goonies era Sean Astin,
Well, he's got that kind of, doe-eyed, innocent thing going on.
It's hilarious when Judy goes in to wake him up and do what you had said earlier, and to wake him up and say, "Hey, do you believe kids when they say things?" And he's sort of like, "Yeah, sure." And she says, "Well, these dolls have killed this girl." And he's like, "Oh, okay, I'm going back to bed." And she's like, "Oh, you said you'd believe me," and kind of shakes him. And as she walks away, he looks down and he sees,
What's that on your slippers?
I don't know.
That's blood.
Yeah, well, it was pretty bloody when they dragged her away.
It was so funny.
It is funny. And there are parts, I don't know if they were intentionally playing it for comedy, but there are parts that are so over the top, especially towards the end, that, they had to kind of at least be a little bit in on the joke.
I think so.
But I'm cool with it. Like, that's fine. Basically, then, from here, what happens is all of the bad people kind of get picked off as Judy and Ralph are kind of walking around and exploring. And I think the next one to go is the stepmother, right? Rosemary?
Mm-hmm.
It's very simple, like she's just laying in her bed and all of a sudden she starts seeing things under her covers moving, and the dolls are giggling. The dolls are always giggling. I read that the director, it was his wife and kids and family friends and things who recorded all of these giggles that are pretty funny. So she throws the covers off, and what do you know? Here are all these dolls, and they they look mean, like they've got mean faces, and they've got like knives.
They're all stabbing.
And that's it. And they start stabbing her, and then she gets up, and they're like trying to hack off her limbs with a hacksaw while she's just standing there. And
they have a hacksaw.
And eventually she kind of starts trying to fight back. And it all happens relatively quickly, and again, eventually, like, the dolls are, every time she turns around, there's just, like, dozens of dolls, like, in her path, menacing her. And eventually, I don't know what her thought process was here.
No.
But she goes and takes a flying leap over one of the groups of dolls out the window. And apparently that's what killed her. Now, I read that when they initially shot the movie, and the producers watched it, they wanted more gore. And so they actually went back in and refilmed a bunch of shots with a lot more gore. And one of the shots that they filmed was one of the dolls disemboweling Rosemary with a pitchfork. And there were lots of other things too, apparently. But then I guess they shot all that footage, and then they went back and watched it with all that footage, and they were like, yeah, never mind. Too gory.
It's a little too much. I would almost argue it's already too gory. Like, it just, tonally, this movie, I think, almost could have been a little more successful if, well, I don't know, probably not. But, there's a lot more that had to be improved. But it could have been a little more successful if it had been more squarely aimed at kids, I think.
Yeah.
And the only thing that keeps it from being squarely aimed at kids is, I said to my wife, I said, you could cut 10 seconds out of this movie and you could show it to any kid.
Right, but without cutting those 10 seconds, probably not, because it is pretty brutal, and the effects look pretty good. They look pretty real and bloody and gross, and yeah, probably a little too much for little kids. Now, I guess maybe I was just a weird little kid, because that stuff didn't bother me. But I certainly wouldn't show it to my niece and nephew yet, like they're 10 and 7. No, too little.
They're not as weird as you, Craig.
I know, and it makes me sad all the time, but it's all right. And then, so Rosemary gets killed, and then Enid, was that her name? The other Madonna girl, she goes out looking for Isabel, and it's I don't know, kind of cool, I guess. Like, she makes her way up to the attic where Isabel has been dragged, and she's looking around. And the first time she's up there, she actually ends up getting up there a couple of times. But the first time she's up there, she doesn't find anything. But we see Isabel tied up in a corner in the dark, and frankly, it just looked like the actress wearing a doll mask at first.
Yeah.
But the idea that you're supposed to get is that she's turning into a doll. And eventually Enid makes her way back up there, and she finds Isabel. And this is where we get the homage to the cover art that the producer demanded. Isabel leans forward, and her doll eyeballs fall out of her head into the pool of blood between her legs, and she picks them up and holds them next to her head. And Enid screams and tries to run away, and then the dolls get her. And I liked this scene too, because one of the things, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but I think that you and I have talked about it, even about the Child's Play series. How are these people getting killed? It's a doll. Just pick it up and toss it away.
Yeah.
And I liked that this movie addressed that to an extent. When she's fighting the dolls, eventually she pulls off her boy toy belt with the big boy toy belt buckle, and she just starts whipping them with it. And that is effective for a while. She can keep them at bay.
And she's burning them. Yeah.
Yes. And there's also some cool stuff here, when she breaks away their porcelain faces, there's these decrepit, monstrous looking skeletons underneath. Which is kind of cool.
Well, and that was unexpected to me. And again, I guess maybe that comes from the cover art, right? But it makes this different. See, when you watch this and you're first watching it, and the guy says that he's a doll maker and he has his workshop and he has legitimate doll parts and everything everywhere, you're thinking this is kind of a Toulon thing, right? That he's made these plastic and porcelain dolls come to life. But what we later find out as this goes along, as evidenced by Isabel, turning into a doll, is no, they're turning people into dolls. And so that's what makes the dolls alive. They're just like creatures that are just disguised as dolls. It's
right.
So when they break, the porcelain shatters, and underneath them is this, like you said, this kind of gross looking face that's I guess supposed to be a shrunken human without skin or something. It's definitely shocking, and it's nice to get a little twist like that at this point in the film.
Yeah.
And I thought legitimately that bit when earlier on, when they're up in the attic looking around and they don't see her but we do, that is the creepiest part of the whole film.
Yeah, it was kind of creepy. And it's funny because I was, just reading stuff about this, and they had already released the girl who played Isabel, so it was actually the director's wife who plays Rosemary. It was actually her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was actually her under that mask. It's key. We talk about this. We talked about this when we reviewed 31, about how Rob Zombie casts his wife all the time. Apparently, Stuart Gordon worked with his wife regularly. I think she was in Reanimator. She was in a few of his other movies, too. Just to read kind of some of the backstory of some of this, that it's cool to see how these people who have intimate relationships with one another support each other. Carolyn Purdy Gordon, not only did she play her own role, but then she also played Isabel when she was turning it. She was also, some of the voices of the laughing dolls. Just those little production details are just kind of interesting to read about.
I do have to say that this girl's demise, much like her demise, is really disappointing. She puts up a good fight, and she does her own version of jumping out the window, where she comes in front of a line of toy soldier dolls, and for some reason this stops her in her tracks. Like, she doesn't want to whip them, and it's not really clear why. And she just stands there while the general doll raises his saber, and the lineup of infantry dolls shoots her. And they shoot, like, real bullets, I guess, and they blast her away. Like, why didn't she just run up and kick them over?
Right, of course, why not? But at the same time, I kind of liked it because it was... okay, I can just whip them with my belt, and then they're not dangerous anymore. And then she comes out and she sees, and the toy soldier dolls are super cute. Like, they look like super cute toy soldiers, but then they end up being deadly. And it's kind of the answer to that question. Like, yeah, you can whip some of us, but we have guns. So...
and hacksaws.
Yeah. And they do, like, they blow her away. Like, she's got squibs under her clothes that blow out. Like, it's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, it really is.
And then she's done. Then there's a scene where Judy and Ralph are looking around, and they end up in the storage room. And this was my favorite scene with the dolls, because this was when the dolls were the most animated. First of all, they reveal themselves. Judy at some point sits down with Ralph, and she's got her Punch doll, and Punch speaks.
Do you know something that I don't know?
I guess I do.
Oh, honey, I wish I knew what you were talking about.
You know, Ralph. Deep down inside, you know.
So, they reveal themselves, and then they end up in this storage room, and all the dolls animate and come to life, and they're not threatening.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I say that this is my favorite part with the dolls, this is also maybe the part that frustrates me the most, because I feel like Ralph acts totally out of character in this part.
Yeah.
Because he's like, well, we got to get out of here. Damn these dolls. And he starts, like, stomping on them and stuff. And I get why, for the purposes of the plot, he needed to do that, but it just seemed out of character.
It was 180 degrees out of his character.
Right.
You're right.
It put him on the same level as all the other adults, and
it was stupid, because the whole reason that the dolls are not attacking, for example, Judy, is because she's kind and she's nice and she respects them. And Ralph, the whole time through, was on the same plane as Judy. And so it makes no sense for him to be doing this except to service the plot. And that was so transparent.
Yeah.
And it really annoyed me too.
Yeah, me too. Ultimately it works out because, the dolls get pissed, as they should, and they start attacking him until Judy screams at them, stop, he's my friend. And they do stop. And then Judy and Ralph sit there while the dolls have like a conversation.
They have like a powwow.
Yeah. And we can't understand what they're saying, but apparently Judy can, and she keeps saying they're trying to decide whether you're a grown-up or you're just a kid disguised as a grown-up.
Yeah.
And Ralph's like, I've been trying to figure that out my whole life. But ultimately, the dolls are benevolent and let them go. Meanwhile, the dad, David, finds Rosemary's dead body in the bed, and that's kind of a stupid and gross scene where the dead body somehow mysteriously, like, crawls on top of him. Like, it doesn't even make any sense.
No.
But he thinks that Ralph did it for whatever reason. I don't know. So he goes out looking for them, and he finds them in the basement. And he starts attacking Ralph, but then Punch, the doll, sticks up for Ralph and starts attacking the dad. Ultimately, like, there's kind of a fight between them, and it's kind of cute and funny because Punch the doll is cute and laughing and stuff. But eventually, David gets the better of him. Meanwhile, the dolls have just pulled Judy and Ralph away. Like we're just gonna get you out of here. And so David defeats Punch and stomps his head in, and then the old couple shows back up, and there's this whole scene where they're talking to him. It's funny because he calls Hillary, "You old witch," and she's like, "Oh, you figured it out." So it turns out they are witches, and the old guy says to him,
Hillary and I think the bitterness people feel as adults can turn to love if they surrender to the goodwill toys provide. Some people can be saved. We give everyone a sporting chance. But the others, like you, well, they have to start over and play a new role in the big game.
Out of nowhere, David, we see that he's in pain, like he's writhing in pain, and then he transforms in a very cool, practical way into Punch the doll that he has just destroyed. And so that's where, like you've already alluded to it, but that's where we are cemented the idea that that's what these people do. They're witches, and they kind of, take these people in and they test them. And if you pass the test, if you're a decent person, then you're all good. And if you're a jerk, then you get turned into a doll and you become part of their collection. And I don't know, it's kind of cool.
it is neat, and that's where it gets a little fairy tale-ish, right?
Yeah,
that's where it's kind of like a version of Hansel and Gretel, which not so ironically, the girl was reading in bed. During the day. So
well, and I think part of what makes it so effective is that these older actors, the ones that play the elderly couple, they're very good and very convincing. And I liked them a lot, and so they really sold this explanation at the end.
They were the only ones to sell it. They were the only ones to sell this movie, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then I just think the ending is so funny. And this is such a tongue-in-cheek ending. I mean, they had to do this laughing hysterically because then I guess they sort of fall asleep because suddenly the old couple wakes up Ralph and Judy. And they're like, like what happened? And they're like, well, you guys were out for a while. You were sleeping and whatnot. And so we woke you up. And Judy's like, well, where is my dad and my stepmom? And the grandpa says, oh, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, Judy. And he pulls a note out.
Yeah.
It's ostensibly written from them saying that they've left and that they left enough money for a plane ticket to Boston so that she can rejoin her mom.
And they're moving to a different country and changing their names.
That's right. So don't bother looking for it.
And then Ralph's like, well, what about the two girls that I came with? And he's like, oh, yeah, hold on a second. And he pulls out the note he's getting, and he's like, P.S. I took the two hitchhikers with me. And then Ralph's
so
like,
funny.
Let me see the note. And the guy just tosses it in the fire. Oh,
that's
oops.
right. And Ralph's like, well, what about me? And he says, oh, well, they left enough money for your plane ticket, too.
Yeah.
And so they just kind of have to accept that, and they leave.
The old people are like, we went out to check on your car in the night. We managed to get it out of the mud. Oh, you did? You old decrepit people? Cool. Awesome.
That's right.
And then when Judy and Ralph are driving away, Judy's like, "You'll really like my mom. She's young and pretty." Have you ever wanted a daughter?
Well, apparently there was supposed to be a sequel to this.
Yeah.
That they had written up where Judy and Ralph go away, and Ralph ends up marrying Judy's mother and becomes her father, and then they get in the mail 2 dolls that are
The toy makers.
Yeah, the toy makers. And that would have been kind of interesting to see where they go with that. Yeah, it's a shame that didn't happen. He made plenty of killer doll movies since here, though. I mean, this was just the beginning for Charles Band. And then it has kind of an interesting cap at the end where we see a long shot of the house, and in front of the house we see another car pull up and get stuck in the mud. And this is all while the credits roll. And sure enough, like a mother and father pop out of the car and come around and check it. It's just like a replay of the previous scenes. And they have 2 kids that they yank out of the car that they're clearly treating poorly. And we see that this is just going to happen all over again. So, yeah,
which is I liked that. I liked that they included that. It kind of adds to the mysticism of the whole thing. Like, this just kind of plays on a loop. This is what these people do.
Yeah, like there's something that draws bad parents to this house and forces them into this situation.
Well, and that's very fairy tale too, in that the bad people get what's coming to them, and the good people live happily ever after. And I don't know, I like that aspect of it. Really, talking about it with you, I'm appreciating it more than when I was watching it yesterday.
Yeah,
because it's easy to identify its flaws, of which there are many. But there is something charming about it too, and I can understand why I enjoyed it so much as a kid. Oh, and one thing that we left out was when they were leaving, Judy says, "Oh, I wish I could say goodbye to Mr. Punch," and the guy Gabriel pulls out the Punch doll, who we know is the dad, and he's even dressed in the dad's pajamas. And she's like, "Goodbye, Mr. Punch. I love you." And in the dad's voice, he says, "Bye, short stuff." And like Ralph and Judy kind of look at it weird, and then they just leave. I remember as a kid thinking that was weird. And it's dark,
It's
like
really dark.
Just her dad, her father, is gone and like damned to be in this toy forever. But he was a jerk anyway, so she's better off.
It would have been even darker if they had handed her the doll.
Yeah,
she got away with him.
Oh,
well,
gosh.
It's funny, like you said. I mean, you kind of wanted to not like this movie, and there were times when it really felt like it was dragging, even though it's only like an hour and 15 minutes long.
Right.
And there's so much that's corny and goofy about it, but it's got a lot of good things going. And like I said earlier, its heart was really in the right place. And it works as... It almost works as a kid's horror movie. It just fails on a little too many levels to be a good movie. But it's from the same pedigree, as Troll.
Yeah.
And, these people later on went on to make Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I mean, Troll is better, I think, as a kid's horror movie.
Oh, yeah.
But this one is not worse by too many degrees.
Yeah, I mean, it's got its charms. I'll give it that. And if you haven't seen it, if you're a horror enthusiast and you haven't seen it, it's on Amazon Prime. You could probably find it on YouTube. I don't know. It's not like... it's some classic that people are guarding carefully. I'm sure it's widely available. And if you haven't seen it, it's worth checking out. It's only an hour and 15 minutes of your time.
Yeah.
It's worth giving it a go.
And laughing at and stuff. And I will absolutely, I won't watch this again, but I'll probably watch at least one more time with my son.
Sure. Somewhere down the line.
Yeah, in the distant future.
All right, well, thanks for hanging with us for another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. If you have any comments about this movie, if you remember it fondly, or if you know anything about it, have any insights that we failed to mention today, please feel free to comment on our Facebook page or our website. Todd, I'll once again throw the website to you because I always screw it up.
twoguys.red40net.com.
There you go. We love hearing from you, and we appreciate you taking your time to give us a listen. Until next time, I'm Craig.
And I'm Todd.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.